Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kantha, it does. They need me.
Welcome to End of Dragons Daily 60. We definitely are 60, right? Like, I thought we'd already done it, but look in local video files, I can't seem to see a project for it. So I guess that's today. As we move in through April and spring really starts to hit us, best time of year. Hope you guys are all doing good. The footage in the background should be some classic dungeon stuff. I don't think I've shown any dungeon footage on any of these videos, probably for evident reasons. So we'll start with some Mascon Catacombs there and roll on through. A variety of Kantha related topics in response to the previous part, as I don't really know what kind of big topic I'm super interested in at the moment. We'll probably find in a couple of days I'll kick up another elite spec, so look out for that. Let's open up with ZuraSteri, who says, we did set up the waypoints in Dragonfall, so this is a response to my discussion of how we kind of skipped a phase of Path of Fire, and that was when the northern peoples of Tyria first kind of re-explored that area of the world, and the Prior went through and set up all their waypoints. They said, in Dragonfall, at the beginning of the meta, you have to escort to bring the 3 waypoints into place. It was really cool. It had good animations and stuff as well. This was not the only comment I had on this. I had a lot of people mention this, and as well, one of you as well quite astutely remembered that way back in the day with South Sun, there was kind of a similar situation going on. You know, the Lion Guard went through and we kind of helped them set up the infrastructure. And apparently a part of that was putting the waypoints in place as well. I actually don't remember the waypoints being a part of that meta, but I trust that you guys are probably right. It's funny to me, the fact that we had one person mention the South Sun thing and so many other mention the Dragonfall thing is a good example to me of just how divergent everyone's memories are of the MMO now. There's been so many different events and moments. You know, one guy might remember something that's correct and someone else has got a completely different example somewhere else from years apart, but not realize the more recent one. In any case, the main point being, this would be cool at the start or somewhere within the Kantha expansion, and I'd like to see it. The other thing as well on that note is like the Guild Initiative and Dougal Keen, and whether they set up their stuff or whether they'll be competing with the Jinlai Guild, whether Black Lion will compete with a new trading post kind of thing. At least in the story, there's don't have to be actual mechanics in the game. Those I think are all really exciting, especially the idea of the Jinlai. Next, we've got Rhoen van der Warp, who says, I really hope that they look more masteries behind little collections with a story like the skimmer diving. This would let the devs to really get some cool lore behind their masteries. So yeah, I did want to talk about this a bit, because in a recent part, I pointed out that when it came to the elite specializations, they probably wouldn't do like big story collections along with them that like gate them, because that's not kind of how they're made. However, when we look at the skimmer with the diving, yeah, they kind of put a whole story on there first. And you'll notice that with the mastery system, not necessarily hero points and elite specs, but at least with the mastery system, they have been playing around a lot. Like getting the masteries in the Icebrood Saga, champions at least, it's not just a matter of the experience and the points, it's also a matter of getting the currency to buy the right to spend the points to earn the XP. Like, they've really done a lot of layers. Now, I actually personally think that's really messy and unideal, and it's just another sort of black mark against the mastery system. But it does demonstrate the modern day ArenaNet, they do find it comfortable adding all this extra stuff in front of, you know, what once upon a time was laid bare. So maybe this is something we'll see with elite specs. I have to say, I really love the idea of the new elite specs, each having a unique collection that you do before unlocking it. And I know some like players are going to sit there and say, oh, I just really want the new skills instantly, none of the rest of the game matters. But I think this would do a lot to get people to connect with the lore of that spec, and it would be a nice logical progression and improvement over what we saw in Path of Fire. You know, Heart of Thorns is very bare bones, POF went a bit further with the NPCs in game, a bit of dialogue, and now End of Dragons ups the ante even further. So I like the idea. I think that the skimmer story kind of sets a bit of a precedent there. Next we've got Jared, who says, I like the idea of climbing, especially if you can use swiftness and quickness to speed up the climbing action. Well, let's be clear, you shouldn't be using quickness or swiftness even, actually, now that I think about it. Remember, they did do a big patch where they tried to disconnect the effects of swiftness and super speed and quickness from animations, especially the quickness thing. That's not been in the game for years, except in some obscure places, like when Path of Fire came out and the Choya tonic was added. If you have quickness during one of their animations, you roll really fast. This has ended up being really good in Fractals. Stuff like that really shouldn't be in the game, and like obscure toys and stuff. So I think with a whole mastery, you wouldn't see the devs do this. In any case, they say imagine new PvP maps that include climbing terrain, like a rotating King of the Hill zone on a Kantha map where you have to climb to reach the top of the points. You can activate a typhoon that pushes people off the points and knock people off with skills from the ground level. It would be crazy. I like this. This is one of those. This is what I used to be like. You have like one little nugget of an idea, and all of a sudden you're talking about typhoons and all this other crazy stuff because you're just so inspired and imaginative. In all reality, I don't think End of Dragons is going to come with a new game type. I think we'll be lucky to see another 2v2 map during its era, and we'll be lucky to see another Conquest map during this era. And importantly as well, I don't think that masteries will affect any of that stuff. Like, you would have seen masteries affecting PvP during the Heart of Thorns era if the devs liked that idea, and they didn't do it. And that's because PvP is meant to be instant, level playing field, competitive. There is no requirement to reach level 80. There is no requirement to unlock an elite spec. There's no requirement to get money for gear or anything. It's an instant equal playing field. And since the mastery system is really, by its true nature, meant to be a progression thing, I think they just kind of cut it away. We saw that they didn't do it with Path of Fire either. So yeah, I don't know whether you'd get a new map here, just as you don't get mounts in any PvP maps, even though they could have had a big Conquest map that had, you know, mounts somehow engagement. The one place that is interesting though is World vs. World. World vs. World is an area that continues to embrace that idea of progression. And now, you could play with it in fun ways. I wonder how that would open up the Desert Borderlands even more. And when we're talking about the idea of a new specific End of Dragons map coming in, all of a sudden, maybe there's fun stuff that they can do there. I especially like the idea of the territories, you know? When you have the territory, your Warclaw runs faster within that territory. When you have the territory, you're allowed to glide. If you don't have the territory, you can't. Well, now maybe it's a similar thing going on with climbing. As long as there's like clear animations and understanding amongst the player base what you're able to do while you're in a zone versus not, which is a challenge that I think they might have already tackled. This could be a fun addition for World vs. World. I can see it. Next, we've got JD, who says, entering Path of Fire, we see the pyramids of Amnoon being assaulted. How do you imagine, or how would you like Kantha to be introduced in End of Dragons? So I've actually mentioned this many times, the minecart, the dredge tunnel, the explosion of light, arriving in the Echovald forest, a Tengu with a rifle staring down the barrel of the gun. I've mentioned this several times. But JD goes on to say, this is purely headcanon speculative, as we have no real indicator of why we're headed to Kantha. And remember, with Path of Fire, that was kind of a very flimsy, almost random justification. I mean, it was because Balthazar was going after Kralkatorrik, but that was because they had just decided that Kralkatorrik would go deeper down there. Kralkatorrik could have gone anywhere. The original location for Kralkatorrik was justified because of the novel and Glint's location, but after that they could have moved him wherever. And especially if you remember, the actual way in which the commander finds out to go to the desert was just like a random vision from the Eye of Janthir that actually depicted a ton of stuff that wasn't even in the X-Pack really in the end. I mean, it kind of semi-was. Anyway, it's purely headcanon. We have no real indicator, but for years I've liked the idea of arriving at the Kaineng docks by ship and finding the city completely abandoned and desolate. A dark, quiet labyrinth of eerily quiet streets and empty homes. We got this treatment a bit finding the Bureau Marches, but there were bodies and the mystery was resolved relatively quickly. Finding an abandoned city and exploring for clues could fit with your idea of placing the Assyrian gates as we explore and investigate the city. I was very disappointed in Heart of Thorns finding the maps established packed settlements because I missed the feeling of actually being lost and remote interior. That's a good point. That did kind of take away from Heart of Thorns to a degree. As for resolution to this speculative story, we eventually discover that Kanthan's escaped to the mist similar to the Aether Blades due to some threat or dragon until the commander inevitably comes in and saves the day. All in all, I just want the darker storylines to continue. Again, entirely speculative, but I'm curious what overall story themes or plot points you would like to see at the start of End of Dragons. Well, I love your idea. I hadn't thought of this whatsoever. But I adore it, and I adore it for the same reason I talked about a few weeks ago, and that's that I really want them to really mess with our expectations of what this region of the world is. I don't want to see them just follow the movement of the world article to a T and everything to be on rails and completely according to expectation. My thing was to say that maybe one of the factions, the Kurziks or the Luxons, are just dead and wiped out. You've gone with the idea that, you know, it's your average Kanthans around in Kaineng Center. And I like that idea too, because then you get this really, really powerful contrast of what should be a crowded, cluttered city that still architecturally is a crowded, cluttered city, but is hauntingly quiet. And you get a little bit of that post-apocalyptia. It's kind of a vibe that I don't think ArenaNet's really managed to nail in Guild Wars 2 yet, just because there's not been any regions with that kind of story. Maybe the Ruins of Ore, but they were never quite cluttered enough. And from an engine perspective, it might kind of help as well explain why there aren't billions of NPCs wandering around all over the place and how the hell you make content in an environment like that. You know, because when you really get down to it, Kaineng was depicted not very well in Guild Wars 1. The idea of it being a bustling proper city, they did hit a lot of bars, but really they were able to relax and lean on the fact that it was the mid to late 2000s when the game came out, and gamers could suspend a lot of their disbelief. I don't know whether people would do that so much in Guild Wars 2 of 2021. So you do this kind of story beat, and you maybe explain a little bit more of where these people are going. You can even actually, you guys might say, well, I do want a populated city as well. Well, I would argue you can have your cake and eat it too, because you could just have certain sections of the city that are abandoned. Now that kind of goes against this idea that they all escaped the mist and maybe reduces a bit of the grandiosity there, but it's kind of interesting. One of you guys linked me, they're called Sock in Discord. I think that they might make YouTube videos. I'm not too sure, I can't remember. Well, I was talking about this a while ago, but a player called Sock made some fan art of Kantha in a Guild Wars 2 style the other day. Linked it to me and said you should talk about this on End of Dragons Daily. So here we are. Check this out, guys. Alt tab back in. Look at this image. Now this is really cool. What they've done, as far as I understand, is taken some of the patterns and textures and ideas from the existing map art and sort of dropped it down. But this is their imagined way in which Kantha might look in the sequel. It's really striking, isn't it? One thing that I think is very beautiful is they've gone for the entire landmass. What we called Kantha in Guild Wars 1 is really just those northern areas, but they've painted a ton of stuff, and this really demonstrates, I think, in a nice way, where all the living world could take us and so on. Anyway, aside from just oogling how pretty this thing is and how talented this fan art is, look at the city. Now, what's especially inspiring to me there is it's almost like, through their interpretation, the city's in 3 chunks, you know? Maybe you have, like, Kaineng Center, but maybe there's a concept of, like, a Kaineng East and a Kaineng West, or, you know, whatever. They can have entirely different names. And the people of these areas have different ideals and passions, and maybe in Guild Wars 2 we explore them more, because those other chunks of the city on those other coastlines we didn't go to. We saw them on the map art, but we never went to them. And so yeah, you can have one of them's randomly haunted and desolate and abandoned, and I think this is a fun idea. As for completely other concepts, I mean, there's a lot of fun ones. If you're going to go with like a Path of Fire style thing, another interesting idea. And again, it relies a lot on why we are entering Kantha. I acknowledge that. But there's this other idea of a tidal wave striking right as we get there. You know, you're flying along on the airship and you're watching everything get devastated below, similar to how we saw the pyramids getting destroyed. I think there was something really cinematic and excellent about how ArenaNet opened POF. You know, I'm very much dismayed very often thinking about all the new players that just instantly rush to grab a mount and then invalidate a lot of the game. But it happens. And at least for those players who do that, at least they get this big epic cinematic moment right at the start of POF. And I'd like to think that at the End of Dragons era, something similar will be going on. So whatever it is, it's got to be big, it's got to be beautiful, it's got to be gorgeous. And if that means a lot of destruction as we fly along in an airship, then so be it. Another cool thing about the airship start is riding an airship while riding a mount. And on your first time through POF, you don't get that experience, but on our first time in End of Dragons, we would, or at least many of us vets would. Got 2 messages from Uniquely Samurai. First says, according to the Zephyrhites, Kantha had been one of their most culturally colourful ports of call, implying that Kantha's cultural side had only prospered in the following years. I just found this on the Emperor Yusuku page of the wiki. Since in the real world, isolationism rarely results in cultural diversity, I'm guessing that Kantha has reversed many of their xenophobic policies and are now more isolated by the dragons than they are by hatred and fear. It's interesting they're still so secretive about their country. Wherever there is trade happening with other nations such as Kryta, there may be some big secret that the Kanthas are holding on to that could change the story's direction. Well, I don't know whether I agree that they have some big secret. I propose something similar for the Dominion of Winds, right? And I think it would be weird to go into... I did just say that I would like to see them not follow everything by the book. So changing stuff and surprising us is definitely something I'd like to see. However, what you need to appreciate is a lot of the Guild Wars 1 Winds of Change stuff was specifically there to set up the idea that this isolationism was brewing. And what fallout, what conclusion have we seen from that? What perk have we got there? Well, we had the Tengu's exile. Is that it? Is that all the devs were ever going for? And now they've just reversed direction, that's it? I kind of assume that they have some story that does continue that idea, because otherwise we've had a ton of setup that they'll just ignore, and I think that would feel a bit wonky. Maybe it doesn't matter that it feels wonky, because players like me who remember Winds of Change and stuff are probably very, very rare at this point. So yeah, maybe they'll completely reverse direction. And I think it's even likely because, as you've just mentioned, there is recent dialogue in the game from a Zephyrite that suggests that they have a lot going on in terms of mixing with different cultures over there. Anything that the devs have written recently, I think takes precedence and matters more. And so what we're actually talking about here is there's a Zephyrite NPC called Fade, who was available in the early bazaars, and then I think you find in Season 2, and even the recent ones, you can recap the events of Heart of Thorns with them. And they don't explicitly say that Kantha is a cultural melting pot, but they say that they've been there at the same time as a bunch of new decorations come in, and the decorations were all clearly Kanthan themed. So it's kind of like a very, very, very strong inference, but they don't explicitly say it. So I don't know, maybe the devs have got a little bit of wiggle room on that. I especially like the idea too, because again, if this is the end of Dragons, we're thinking about going beyond the regular borders of the game, introducing a Kantha that is kind of a cultural hub for a ton of new societies and places that we've never been, is going to provide a ton of excitement and breadcrumbing opportunities to take us anywhere else in the future. The other message from Uniquely Samurai was this may be a bit much to ask, but could you do a video explaining the Ministry of Purity and the Emperor? I'm starting to dive into the wiki about them, and it seems like there's a lot of detail to this that I don't think most players would be aware of. Thanks. Yeah, you know, I do want to do this, but it wouldn't be one video. What I'd like to do, you remember last year, right after the expansion was announced, I did an abridged series of the entire Kanthan plotline. I want to do that again for Winds of Change, because it's basically like the sequel campaign. The thing with Winds of Change is it's a lot harder, it's more involved mechanically, and I've only really played it like once, back when it came out, about a decade ago now. So I'm really going to have to do a lot more prep on that one. But that's kind of my plan. I'd like to finish an Empire Divided at some point over this year as well, obviously before the expansion comes out. But I want to time these projects when there's a bit more news about the X-Pack. Like if ArenaNet releases another trailer, I'm assuming we'll get one more before the launch trailer, right? If they do another trailer at some point in the next couple of months, that'll be brilliant. That'll be a catalyst. That'll be a lot of other people looking at series like this right then, and it will actually be worthwhile from a viewership standpoint. What I don't want to do is make these things, and there's only a few hardcore players keeping an eye on the game at the moment that I make them, which is basically right about now. And then when finally everybody starts being interested again, nobody watches because they think it's old, so to speak. It's not old, and all the information would still be relevant, just as the playthrough last year was. But people won't see it that way because they'll see a timestamp from a few months ago, and all of a sudden it's uninteresting to them. They also think I don't look at comments on old videos when I do. Finally, we have Marshall, who says the petrification mechanic can also be a new hazard again. Stay still for too long in specific spots without the mastery and suffer from movement impairing conditions. Some new debuff rendering your skills harder to use, etc. This would be unique for very specific areas though. I don't expect AFK people on waypoints to be affected. A lot of people are going to rebel against you saying this, and they're going to say, oh no, that's too close to the poison from Heart of Thorns. But I'm with you, man, and I say that's a really good idea. Screw those naysayers. I say screw the naysayers for a few reasons. First of all, the poison survival mastery, I think, is a really good format that I never fully got to explore in Heart of Thorns. There are a ton of areas of the jungle that are under the effects of poison, but I don't really know or care about it, because the sad truth is that I unlocked the mastery way before I ever visited them, especially after expansion 2.0 with all the accelerated XP rates. It means that I think a lot of people don't ever really get that Metroidvania side of it that would be a lot of fun. So do it again, do something very, very similar a second time. And also, the idea that masteries can never be similar to one another is flawed immediately. Like, we've seen the volcanoes in Ember Bay are basically just a slightly different themed version of New Hawk Wallows, and people complained, but nonetheless, they are both value adds to the game, different locks with different keys, and I think that, you know, that crossover is going to have to be there at some point. It's kind of like the Elite Specialization discussion we had recently, where the argument was made by you guys in chat that eventually they're going to make some professions feel like other ones, so just embrace it. I think a similar thing can happen here with masteries. It's hard to make really decent exploration Metroidvania feeling masteries. This is a really good concept, and when was the last time we saw it implemented? 5 years ago? Over half a decade ago? Oh, and even then it was a bit shoddy for a lot of us. I'd like to see it in Kantha and have it be petrification spores or whatever you want. It doesn't matter. I imagine a mastery line for the Echovowed Forest, dealing with lots of stuff like that. A separate one in the Jade Sea, dealing with like coral shards and stuff. And fill them out however the devs want, just with unique and interesting things. So there you have it, guys. That's End of Dragons Daily for today, April 1st. Hope you enjoyed the footage in the background. And I'll be back tomorrow. Give me some ideas for big topics. I want to do one more big topic, then an Elite Spec one. So give me your ideas, seriously. Please, I do really, really encourage you to keep dropping the comments. So I've got the best stuff I can to pick from, so the videos are as fun as possible to watch. And yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks to everybody who's been catching the streams and stuff as well that have been going on. I know it might have looked slightly quieter on the YouTube channel since my big lore recap video the other day, and that is basically a gameplay series for what it's worth to everyone. You should see the next episode of that coming out very soon as well. Cheers everybody, see you tomorrow.